Here you go.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a co-founder of DraughtLab, where we level the playing field for food and beverage companies. Let me tell you a typical story in food and beverage. This is Alex. She's looking to grow her business quickly. She's a chocolate maker. And up until recently, she has been just releasing her products based off of gut feeling without any real objective feedback. She's looking to get into the grocery channels, and she knows that for her, failure is a real possibility because 70 to 80% of new products that get into the grocery channels will fail. But what's interesting here is the discrepancy between the top businesses and everyone else. If you are not one of the top companies, your products fail in grocery at an enormous 88% rate. So what's the difference? Well, one difference is that 100% of these large companies have groups of consumers and expert tasters who taste and evaluate the products for their levels of sweetness, melt rate, or nuttiness. This is called a sensory panel, and they use sensory science. And yes, sensory is a science. In fact, these sensory panels can generate very specific and very accurate flavor feedback. And these companies use this feedback to help inform what they are going to make and what products they are going to sell. So what if Alex wanted to start her own sensory program? Well, she would need about $250,000 just to get started with her one product using traditional sensory methods. That's not the only hurdle she'd have to overcome. She would also have to train her panel with these sensory techniques for about 3 to 5 months, and she would need to recruit sensory expertise to run her program, which is very difficult given that there aren't many sensory scientists in the United States. So given the cost and other hurdles, is Alex able to start her sensory program? Absolutely not. In fact, 84% of US food and beverage companies fall into the same category, either because they don't know that sensory exists, or because they do know that it exists, but the barriers to entry are just too high. This is the problem that we set out to solve with DraughtLab. But before we get into our products, let me tell you a little bit about our team. I'm a globally recognized sensory scientist and have recently been recognized as one of the top 75 people to watch by Imbibe magazine. Matt, Mike, and Chad have been working together for the last 16 years, building businesses and software platforms to answer a whole host of questions in various industries. We are rewriting the playbook on sensory science. We have published new sensory methods, we teach at academic institutions, and we hold chair positions at national trade organizations. So how did we build DraughtLab? Well, we worked with businesses like Alex's to create our own set of proprietary processes and algorithms and made them accessible through our software as a service platform. Our software does not require a degree to operate or an IT department to manage, making it the perfect solution for our target market. We are a B2B software as a service company, and through our monthly paid subscriptions, we are empowering people like Alex to run their own sensory programs. We offer a whole host of different feature tiers and modules to right-size the program for any company and to make sensory accessible for research and development, for quality control, and for R&D. The total addressable market in the US alone, just for this product, is $850 million, but put a pin in that, I'm going to come back to it. And over the last 5 years, we've gained a lot of traction. We are in over 36 different product categories across 12 different countries. We have over 300 paid monthly subscribers, and we are currently bringing in over $500,000 of revenue, most of which is recurring revenue. And we've achieved profitability even through the pandemic. But this is just hitting the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that 84% gap in the market. And so right now, our business objective is to really focus our resources in one particular location. And through our past successes, we know that this location needs to be one in which there are dense businesses across diverse industries, with mature retail as an outlet to the customer, and with healthy support systems and networks like universities and trade organizations. If you think this sounds familiar, it should, because this is the Grow New York region and why we want to be here. We are a New York-based company, but up until now, we have been pushed to do business in disparate regions outside of the state. But we want to focus our resources here, and as we do so, New York could become the influencer to champion sensory. We see this as an opportunity for New York to own its identity, to be a leader, and to be a model and a destination where others would seek to adopt similar mechanisms and engage with the research coming out of New York. And by dramatically increasing that 1 in 10 chance that your product is going to succeed, we are increasing the viability of these businesses and the communities in which they live. It sounds ambitious, but we've actually done it before, and let me tell you how. Back in 2016, only 4% of breweries had a say in what hops were being grown in the US. So we paired up with the USDA and Brewers Association to apply our crowdsourcing methods to build a collective voice that is driving the outcome of hop breeding in the US. And now, after 4 years, this program is still running strong, and 70% of the top growers have actually taken note and adopted our methods and purchased our software. This means that we have developed an entirely new market research model, one that demystifies what customers want, giving farmers confidence that they can sell what they put in the ground. And this same thing can happen here. Our Grow New York strategy is the same as the one that we used in Yakima. Number one, we will work with established organizations like Cornell, like the New York Cider Association and the Brewers Association. We've already spoken with them, and they are excited to work on a bunch of different projects that we know that we can provide value for. The second thing, we will implement our tasting stations across the region because it's the easiest inlet into sensory science, and we know that every single producer can make use of market research tools. And the third thing we will do is grow the marketing of our business to raise awareness of the benefits of sensory science and directly promote our tools. And there's one more huge opportunity. By establishing a consistent stream of flavor data, we are building the largest consumer-based flavor database in the world. And through big data and machine learning, we can create a whole new set of market insights products. We recently spoke to Sierra Nevada, who's one of the top craft breweries in the US, and they are excited about the kind of data that will be coming out of the Grow New York region. So with this in mind, our total addressable market triples. With this data, businesses and retailers can make better purchasing and processing decisions. They can get ahead of trends, and they can connect the consumer to the products that they actually want to buy. And by the way, this total addressable market doesn't even include international markets, so there's a lot of room to grow. With $250,000, we would continue to grow what we've started organically. We would put in some tasting stations and hire some people to run them. At $500,000, we would accelerate our approach by hiring in marketing and starting some more tasting stations. And at $1 million, we would be able to fully execute on our strategy right away. We would hire data scientists, we would hire marketing specialists, and we would hire software developers to really go after that big data approach. And those collaborative projects I mentioned earlier, we're just going to do them. So a lot of the money is going to go back into these New York organizations and universities. And look at what happens to our revenue. Our revenue will hit $9.5 million just by 2024. Remember, 9 out of 10 products that small businesses put into grocery will fail. But we are leveling the playing field, making it possible for these small companies to realize the same or similar success rate as their larger counterparts. As Alex succeeds, she would buy more raw materials from her local producers, more packaging materials from her suppliers, and she would be able to hire more people. So you could see how the indirect jobs could be way bigger than what we laid out. And those direct jobs, We are quickly becoming the global standard for sensory science. And software scales. So you can see how we could hire more than 200 people just in New York. We are in New York. New York needs this, and New York is ready for this. Thank you for your consideration.
That's great. Let's give him a hand.
And
You go ahead. You can
all right. And now I want to get Matt, our CEO and co-founder, to the stage to help with questions.
Great. So we have just over 9.5 minutes. John Eng first.
Very, very interesting. As a fish farm, I produce consumer products. I definitely have an interest in what you're doing. It's very exciting. But tell me, how are you protecting your information? How are you protecting your IP and that not allowing a larger player to come in and kind of replicate it right away?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our processes that we have in there, our sensory processes, our methods, and our data analysis are all things that we're pursuing IP protection on right now. Our flavor maps that we have in there, which are really the languages that these companies use to speak, that we kind of plug and play into the software, those are all copyrighted. The data that we're collecting is all unique to us and is something that is going to take a long time for someone else to really replicate and do something with. And besides that, there is this first mover advantage. That is something that we don't want to be lost on us, that we want to make sure that we take advantage of, which is why we're looking to scale up the company right now and are in this competition.
That's great. John C.
Yeah, I really love the concept and the model. I guess my question would be, any feeling that you seem to be going after a very broad market? Any concerns about not being able to focus and losing quality as you're going into such a large, wide market?
Yeah, so what's interesting about sensory is that sensory is kind of its own market. So there isn't a chocolate sensory market or a cookie sensory market. It's kind of all the same. So most professionals, when they get started, they would work in one product category and move through those. And the software works the same way. It's actually the same dependent on the product. It's really just the language that you plug and play in there. So for us, even getting a start in beer, which is where the name comes from, we were able to grow rapidly there, and we've grown way outside of beer without having any trouble because of the value we produce.
Great. Let's take it back to John Eng.
Kind of related to that, it's that, as you mentioned, this is somewhat, you were specific in how you started with what industry. Your tasting stations, I imagine, were specifically beer tasting stations. How do you expand that to, or what's your reach into other industries? Is there a long startup time, like for instance seafood or meat or anything?
So just a couple of months ago, we did sensory with shellfish and with oysters. So it's a thing that actually happens kind of organically. The tasting stations are actually for everything. It's not just beer. We could do it at farmers markets. We could do it at tasting boutiques. It really doesn't matter. What really matters is how do we get consumers to actually come in and participate in what we're doing and give their time for feedback on the consumer side. For us, it hasn't been difficult as far as getting into these new industries. If you're working with really good industry players that are helping and working with these companies from day to day. In New York, the Brewers Association, Cider Association, wine, all of those are really good avenues to get at all these different industries.
Excellent, thanks. Laura Peterson, over to you.
Hi, well, we grow hops on our farm, so when I read this, I was really interested, but I'm having a hard time getting my head around exactly what would a hop grower do to take advantage of this, especially since, at least in the beginning, many brewers were a little reluctant to use New York hops because they didn't know what the quality would be like, and I assume that the quality issue would be partly taken care of with your program, but exactly how would a hop farmer take advantage of that?
Can you take that?
Yeah.
So what we've done in the Yakima Valley is that there's a central kind of repository where farmers are submitting their hops, and we are bringing them through our crowdsourcing methods and giving that data back in a more holistic sense back to growers so that they can be more informed with what varieties are interesting to brewers and what kinds of flavors they are looking for, what kind of flavors drive that kind of liking. So that's kind of the basics.
And things can vary year to year.
Absolutely.
So would that be able to be,
Yep.
utilized in this situation too, the differences in year to year?
Yeah, absolutely. We have people who, actually we have hop growers, big hop growers in the Yakima Valley who use our software to capture consistent streams of consumer feedback about the varieties that they produce every year. And so they can see trends with how much liking is changing with a specific variety perhaps, or maybe how liking is different from one hill to another, Oregon versus Washington versus New York. So they're doing that kind of research using our tools and applying sensory that way.
And it's also one of the reasons why the tasting stations are so important to us, because it creates this consistent stream of data so that we can be ahead of those trends. A lot of the other people in sensory are trying to use one panel that is well trained to try to identify everything that exists across the world, and that is just not going to work moving forward. So we want to kind of create this pipeline of information that comes in.
Over to Annie Greven for a question.
It's sort of like market research for the taste buds. I mean, it feels like that to me. But,
There's our tagline.
yeah. So I think, though, that means there has to be a lot of people testing, a lot of testing stations, especially if you're going to touch on all the products you've talked about. If you could share a little bit about your strategy there, and I have a follow-on question after that.
Sure. Number one with us is important that these tasting stations are easy to deploy. It's as simple as having an iPad or a QR code. People can do it right on their cell phone. They don't have to download an app. They don't even have to use a web browser. So that's number one. The companies that participate, they have been happy to have us in there because they're getting real-time feedback right there on their product. So even giving that first report to them to tell them, hey, this is what people were tasting, this is what they liked, this is what they thought, this is what was driving it, has that kind of immediate impact. So we see this as something that is going to be easy for us to scale out because we can use the existing spaces that they already have set up to do this tasting.
So my follow-on question is, we just had a company who's making snack foods. How would they use, if I were them, how would they use you guys?
You want to take that, or?
You go ahead.
Okay. So there's a couple different ways. First of all, they could use it. We haven't talked a lot about quality control. Quality control is a big piece of this. Although, the gateway is to do market research. We do a lot of work with that. We actually have a Fortune 500 company that uses us. They trialed us for the first week. In that first week, they found a packaging defect that had bypassed all their analytical, their existing sensory program, and everything. And we had that fixed in the first week, and they've been customers ever since. So there's that piece of it. As far as market research, we can help them. They can do their own sensory studies if they want to get out into their own market. They can use our software for that. But also, if we have these tasting stations set up, we kind of have this whole network that we can start moving products in and around. So if they wanted access to some of these people here in New York, and we've already heard that there are people from the outside that would want access to these tasting stations, they could also utilize that as well.
John?
Yeah, relative to the data, I'm curious if any of your customers have been concerned about, who owns the data and how the data is used and how you deal with that.
Yeah, we haven't had many issues with that, almost at all. All the data that we would use for insights is all anonymized. So it's really more about product category and flavor, which it kind of takes out some of the individual things for them. But it is their data as well. They have it. They have access to it. We've had no issues.
Great. Mary?
Yeah, hopefully a quick one. So you keep referencing these tasting stations.
Yeah.
What's the optimal number of tasting stations? Is there 10 or 100 or 1,000? And are they just in one area, or are they all over?
It's a great question, and that's also part of this growth plan, right? Is getting out there and doing this. I think that part of this is measuring what the hunger of this is going to be, how we rotate those things in. When you start to move into different markets, into different areas, that starts to open up as we go forward. But the thing again is just create this pipeline for data that's coming in, and these future products are things that can be real.
That's awesome. Well, great job. Let's give a hand to DraughtLab. Well done. Woo!